Gaming feels strange right now. Not bad in the simple, easy to explain way, not dead, not collapsing, it's just strange. Because for a long time the deal was simple. You bought the console, you bought the games, and every few years the technology got better, the worlds got bigger, and the whole thing more or less made sense. But now the deal is different. Consoles are getting more expensive even this late in the generation. Physical media is being pushed out, subscriptions keep shifting, and the hidden costs underneath modern gaming, like memory and storage, are rising as well. So the reason that gaming feels so off right now is not just because one thing got worse. It's that a lot of things are changing at the same time, and almost all of them seem to move in the same direction. More expensive, more digital, more controlled. And once you put those pieces next to each other, it becomes hard to ignore what's happening. Gaming is slowly becoming less like a straightforward hobby and more like a system you pay to stay inside. That's the real story here. And by the end of this video, I want to answer one question. Are we just going through a rough patch in gaming right now, or are we watching the business permanently change what gaming is supposed to feel like? Because if this really is the new direction, then the future of gaming is going to be more digital, more controlled, and a lot less generous than the version many people grew up with. And once you see the three big forces pushing it there, it becomes hard to unsee. The first is price, the second is ownership, and the third is a quieter force most people never think about until it suddenly hits their wallet. Let's start with price, because that's where everyone feels the change straight away. Xbox is probably the clearest place to begin, because the Xbox story shows just how much the old rules have started to break. In June 2026, Xbox announced updated console prices, including increases of $100 for some 512GB models and $150 for some 1TB models. Microsoft also reminded people that console prices in the US had already been increased in late 2025. That should feel strange because for most of modern gaming history, the expectation was that consoles got cheaper over time, not more expensive. That was part of the emotional deal. A console launched high, early adopters paid the premium, production got better, the install base grew, and later in the generation the barrier to entry came down. If you waited, you usually got rewarded, but now waiting means paying more. And that changes how the whole category feels. Because once a console starts behaving less like a consumer product that settles down over time and more like something under constant price pressure, people stop feeling like they understand the rules. But the bigger reason why these Xbox price hikes matter is not just the money itself. It's what those price hikes are happening alongside. Xbox is not just trying to be a console brand anymore, or at least it does not want to be seen as one. For years, Microsoft has been pushing the idea that the Xbox can exist everywhere. On your console, your PC, your TV, your phone, and through cloud gaming. From Microsoft's point of view, that makes sense. If gaming is becoming less tied to one device, then Xbox does not want to be trapped inside one box under the TV. It wants to be a platform, a service, a subscription, an account, a place you can drop into from almost anywhere. Now, don't get me wrong, that is a smart business. But from the player's side, the feeling changes. Because once the hardware gets more expensive and the brand becomes more abstract, and the subscription layer sits on top of everything, the obvious question becomes much harder to answer. What exactly am I paying for? Am I buying a console? Am I buying access? Am I buying into its subscription? Am I buying a library I don't really own? Am I buying convenience? That confusion matters because it's the first crack in the old gaming contract. And PlayStation is telling a different version of the same story. If Xbox represents the rising cost of entry, PlayStation represents something else. The slow disappearance of ownership. In July 2026, PlayStation officially announced that physical disc production for all new games releasing on PlayStation consoles will be discontinued starting in January 2028. This is one of those announcements that can sound small if you read it too quickly, and absolutely massive if you sit with it for a second. Because physical discs were never just bits of plastic. They were resale value. They were lending a game to a friend. They were second-hand shops. They were shelves full of boxes that made the hobby feel real. They were competition on price, and most importantly, they meant the platform holder did not control every single route into the game. Once physical starts to disappear, a lot starts to disappear with it. And that changes the balance of power. Because when games become fully digital, the platform gains more control over how they're sold, how they're priced, how they're accessed, and how few alternatives players have when they do not like the terms. That's why this is not just a story about convenience, it's a story about control. And it matters even more because Sony is making this move while also increasing hardware prices. In March 2026, Sony announced price changes for the PS5, PS5 Pro and PlayStation Portal, including a PS5 price of £570 in the UK and €650 in Europe. So if you zoom out, PlayStation is effectively saying two things at once. Getting into the platform costs more, and over time, buying games inside that platform is likely to become more tightly controlled. This is not just a product update, this is the business model tightening. And when you put that next to what's happening on Xbox, the story stops being about one company making one bad move. It becomes about the industry moving in a common direction. That direction is digital. That direction is expensive. And that direction gives the platform more control, not less. Now, there is a third force making all of this worse, and it's a lot less visible in a headline about consoles or discs. Because not every price increase starts in a boardroom. Some of them start much deeper in the supply chain. Tom's Hardware reported that AI demand is still keeping DRAM and NAND prices climbing through Q3 2026. It also reported forecasts showing DRAM prices predicted to jump 63% in Q2, with NAND prices up to 75%. That sounds technical until you translate it into normal life. Modern gaming runs on memory and storage, so when those parts become more expensive, the cost doesn't stay hidden in a factory spreadsheet. It eventually shows up in the console, the SSD, the gaming laptop, and the general cost of keeping up with a hobby that already feels more expensive than it used to. And that's what makes this moment feel so relentless. From the player side, it barely matters whether a price increase came from a strategy meeting or from AI demand eating into memory supply. The outcome feels the same either way. Gaming gets more expensive, and it doesn't happen in one clean, obvious jump. It happens a bit through the console, a bit through storage, a bit through subscriptions, and a bit through all the smaller costs that pile up around the hobby. That's why so many people feel squeezed even if they couldn't explain the economics behind it all. The pressure is coming from too many places at once, and that's exactly what makes the current generation feel so strange. The old console model was built on a very simple, emotional contract. You bought the machine, you bought the games, and over time the value revealed itself. Now that contract is being rewritten. Xbox is raising console prices while still trying to define itself as more than a console. PlayStation is moving towards a future where new releases will no longer be produced on physical discs after January 2028, while also raising hardware prices in key regions. And underneath all of that, the wider hardware market is being squeezed by rising memory and storage costs, tied partly to AI demand. So the pressure is not just coming from one direction, it's coming from every direction at the same time. And when that happens, gaming stops feeling like a simple hobby and starts to feel like a stack of business systems laid on top of one another. A hardware system, a subscription system, a digital storefront system, a storage upgrade system, an account-based ecosystem that becomes more valuable to the company the deeper you go. That's why the mood around gaming feels so different right now. It's not just anger, it's fatigue, and people can feel that the industry is becoming less generous. There's less ownership, less simplicity, and less flexibility, and a lot more optimization. That's the biggest shift happening underneath all of this. Game companies are no longer just fighting to sell you a console or a game. They're fighting to own the relationship around your gaming life. They want your account, your payment cycle, your digital library, your storefront habits, your default platform, and your future purchases. That's why Xbox talks so much about platform reach. That's why PlayStation can move towards a disc-free future. And that's why rising component costs matter so much more than most players ever wanted them to. Because gaming is no longer just about making great hardware and great games. It's also about building a system that keeps you inside it. And when every major company starts pulling in that direction at once, the player is the one who starts to feel boxed in. So where does that lead everyone? Probably not in a collapse. Gaming isn't dying. The more likely outcome is that gaming becomes more segmented. The most invested players will keep playing because they love the hobby and because the best games are still good enough to justify a lot. But casual players, price-sensitive players, and anyone who used to see gaming as a simple entertainment purchase are going to feel this shift much harder. Because once consoles cost more, once storage costs more, once physical ownership starts fading, and once subscriptions become the default layer sitting on top of everything, the barrier to entry stops feeling so casual. It starts feeling managed, and that's dangerous, not just for players, but for the industry itself. Because if gaming becomes too expensive, too closed, or too confusing, people don't always leave dramatically. Sometimes they just drift, and drift is dangerous. That's how a hobby slowly loses part of its pull. That's the part that I think the industry should actually be nervous about. Players will put up with a lot if they still feel respected. They'll tolerate high prices if the value is obvious. They'll tolerate digital if the trade-off feels fair. Hell, they'll even tolerate an ecosystem lock-in if the games are extraordinary enough to make it worth it. But when the changes seem to move in that same direction, more expensive, more closed, more controlled, people start asking a different question. Is it still being built for players, or is it mainly being optimized for the companies running it? That's the real tension inside of gaming right now. And that's why this moment matters more than it looks. Because this isn't just a story about price hikes. It's a story about what kind of future gaming is choosing. A future built around access, subscriptions, controlled ecosystems, and tighter digital ownerships can absolutely make money. The question is whether it still feels like gaming in the way people actually fell in love with it. That, to me, is the whole issue. Not whether digital is technically more convenient. Not whether subscriptions technically offer value. Not whether these companies can justify every move in a shareholder presentation. The real issue is whether the emotional experience of being a player is getting better or worse. Because a hobby can become more efficient while becoming less lovable. And right now, gaming is in danger of doing exactly that. So my honest read is this. Gaming isn't dying, but it's becoming more expensive, more digital, and more controlled than the version many people grew up with. Xbox's price increases tell you that even late generation consoles are no longer protected from upward pressure. Sony's official plan to end physical disc production for new PlayStation releases starting in 2028 tells you the industry is more willing than ever to trade ownership and openness for control. And the rise in DRAM and NAND costs tells you that the hardware side of this business is now being shaped by forces far bigger than gaming itself. Put together, these aren't random headlines. They're clues, and all of them point in the same direction. Gaming is entering a new phase. Whether that phase feels exciting or exhausting is going to depend on one thing more than anything else. Can the companies making all of these moves still make players feel like what it is on the other side is worth the cost, worth the compromise, and worth the loss of simplicity? Because if they can, people will stay. And if they can't, then all the convenience, all the subscriptions, and all the ecosystem strategy in the world won't be enough. People don't stay loyal to systems just because they're efficient. They stay because there's still magic on the other side of the screen. So I want to hear your read on this. Do you think gaming is becoming too expensive and too controlled, or do you think this is just the unavoidable next phase of the industry? And which shift worries you more? Xbox raising prices, PlayStation moving away from discs, or the way memory and storage costs are quietly making everything worse in the background? Please do let me know your thoughts. I've been Adam of Future State. Please leave a like, subscribe, and I hope to see you in the next video.